I just had a really simply powerful experience. I was feeling so tired this morning, like tired in my eyes. And I was feeling like I wouldn't be able to shake it all day. And I had taken my supplements, but I hadn't yet had my coffee, so I stopped at Tim Hortons for coffee and sat down at a table and had my binder out studying what I'm facilitating today. And there was this table of 4 men across the way. I had my headphones in and I had taken out my name tag for the group, and it was on the table. So I heard someone calling my name, and it was one of the men at the table across the way, and he just started making some small talk, talking about his knee surgery, asking what I was studying for, things like that. And after we talked for a couple minutes, even though the restaurant's loud and it was sort of, I should have really got up to talk to him because it was kind of yelling across the way a little bit. But after we stopped talking, that tiredness in my eyes was gone. So it shows the power of the nutrient of human connection. And lately I feel sort of like I don't like living by myself. Like I want to live around a bunch of like-minded people and not alone. And it's not about loneliness. It's about this fact of the nutrition, the power of this human connection, the light coming out of someone's eyes. So he was being friendly, and that friendliness changed the way my eyes feel. And I think a lot of this stuff has to do with the eyes, like when we can't fall asleep, or when we don't feel awake, or it's this change in the eyes, and it's really the power of another pair of human eyes that can really change that more than any coffee or molecule or anything. And I was really shown that this morning, and that's why it's so interesting to live daily life and learn something as simple as that. It's so obvious, but it was so marked, the change. Like now my eyes feel completely fine. So yeah, is this a friendly universe? And when it is, it leads to that wakefulness. And I gotta go see my doctor now. Hopefully she'll give me a bit more Zopicone, talking about sleep, and 3 months prescription for when I go, and hopefully I won't have to see her before I go again. I don't want to. And then I'll be off and stuff like that. And I have more to talk about, but I gotta drive now. Yesterday I used that CBD cream on the back of my head during the day, and I felt like I could do stuff that I needed to do better without thinking about it, like just some stuff I'm behind on the computer. And I had to write an email about something advocating for myself, and just different things. It seemed to go a little more smoothly, and then I had quite vivid dreams in the night. And I felt like I slept well. I was sleeping and dreaming, not dreaming awake. And I slept for 11 hours, which is good. I went to sleep around 10:30. So I've been sleeping about 10 or 11 hours, which it seems like I need right now. It'd be nice to figure out how to need about 8 hours sleep. And the other day I learned about something called quinine, which is a substance, a chemical in tonic water. And I heard about it through an article of someone who was talking about recovering from drug addiction, and taking tonic water helps because of the quinine, and it helps to get something across the blood-brain barrier. So I was looking into it a little bit, and there's a little bit of information on Wikipedia that is interesting. And it's kind of a banned substance now. It was used for malaria, but now they have other drugs, and they're saying that the quinine is toxic, whereas the drugs eliminate a lot of the toxic side effects, which who knows, like usually they just say something natural is toxic so they can patent their drugs and make everyone afraid of the natural stuff that can't be patented. And then I found a product on Vitacost that has quinine in it. There's another name for it, which I have to look up, and it's sort of like a homeopathic remedy. It's for restless legs, but I'm going to see if I can get some tonic water and something else to see, maybe that restless leg stuff, to see if it, like what kind of effect it has. Just curious, like usual. Success! I got a prescription for 3 months of medication at the same time from my doctor, and she also gave me 30 more days of Zopicone, which is great because I only take half or a quarter, so that's really like 4 months worth, or 2 to 4 months worth. I've only been taking half, so that could last me a long time. So that's good to know that I have those extra days of sleep until I try to retrain my brain to fall asleep. I submitted a video review to Steve Pavlina for his Abundance Deep Dive class because he asked for video reviews if people wanted to. And since I make videos, I did that. And he said he watched it and he liked my feedback and he liked one of my ideas. So that's cool. And the challenge I'm doing now for when I eat at restaurants is to eat healthier food. I went to Mucho Burrito yesterday and I had a burrito bowl with quinoa, so I didn't have the burrito wrap or rice. And for me, I'm trying to avoid at restaurants foods that are fortified with folic acid. Surprise, surprise, food is fortified with something that's not good for us. And I take methylfolate and folic acid. It actually interferes with folate metabolism. I think I learned this from Dr. Mercola. I'm not surprised. I would think that anything that is mass fortified in things in general isn't good for us, possibly. I'm not sure about vitamin D in milk. I think milk isn't a healthy product, so to put vitamin D in it, I don't think really makes it good. So yeah, and today I had Freshie and I had a bowl instead of a burrito, and I had a bowl with quinoa. So that's where I'm at so far today. I'm at the park and I went to the health food store and thought I would try a different kind of lemon ginger kombucha, and this one's quite vinegary. I also got some goji berries because these really help with digestion for me, I've found in the past. Plus it makes a good snack for work. And I also found 4 different kinds of tonic water that are health food store brand worthy. So I'll show those later and I'll try them after I refrigerate them. And it actually says on the ingredients, quinine sulfate. So it's interesting, and I'm going to watch to see if it affects my sore muscles after rollerblading and playing ultimate frisbee. My muscles really hurt, out of shape, so we'll see if it has any effect on that. And then that might affect my decision on whether I buy that leg cramp vitamin from Vitacost. I'm just curious in this whole something going across the blood-brain barrier thing. And modulating the mind with healthy things. I'm just going to enjoy some fresh air and the sound of someone blowing leaves. I'm noticing how many different shades of green and brown the grass is. One other thing I wanted to say about that man talking to me at Tim Hortons was before he started talking to me, we did meet eyes twice and I smiled. So kind of gave him permission to speak to me. And then he energized me by his friendliness.
What are you doing outside my door, little froggy? What are you doing there? This doesn't look like a place for froggies. Oh. Walked out my door and I totally spotted him. I always spot life in interesting places. I think there's some spider web on your foot. There. I don't know if that was bothering you or not. No, don't go in the spider web, froggy. Aww. Sorry if I made you hide.
This could be my last joyride in my little old car. I insured it for the day because somebody might want to buy it. They want to test drive it. So I'm going to take it for a little stroll. Just took my old car for a spin and it was so fun. I love that old thing. I don't know why. It's just so fun to drive. I kind of want to keep it. I could drive that thing again for another 6 months and then get a discount on a Tesla.
Here are the tonic waters that I bought, and I'm going to try one today. I think I'll try this one. And I'll show you the ingredients.
So this one has water, cane, sugar, white grape juice, citric acid, bitter orange peel, lime peel, orange peel, sodium benzoate, and quinine sulfate. So there's the quinine sulfate. And I looked it up the other day on Wikipedia. And it's also called Chinium sulfuricum as a homeopathic, I think. And it's interesting. There's a lot of interesting bits, but the one that a few things that struck me, not that important, but one is that it can reduce shivering due to low temperatures. And sometimes I feel like I have really low body temperature. Something else that struck me was It says, because of its relatively constant and well-known fluorescence quantum yield, quinine is used in photochemistry as a common fluorescence standard. So the thing that made it that interesting for me is that I think like light and fluorescence and glowing has something to do with light in the brain. And I think this whole thing that I talk about with myself has something to do with light in the brain. And it talked about something about how this quinine molecule gets surrounded by calcium or something and then goes into like a cell or a neuron and then releases calcium, which causes the sodium potassium pump to go off or something. Like and it almost has like a quantum effect. I'm just making this up, I don't know for sure, but it just seems like an interesting little clue. So today I put some CBD oil on my face and my neck and the back of my neck. I'm just reading a little bit of the patent my friend sent me about the CBD cream stuff, and the acronym is BONATH, for back of the neck at the hairline. And the patent's talking about caryophyllene and how it's a medical component of like the marijuana plant, and it's legal. And it says something about helping diseases of oxidative stress. I haven't thought about oxidative stress in a long time, but one book that I have and something that I followed years ago that talks a lot about it, and it really worked to make me feel better, was Dr. Mattson's Eating Alive 2 book, his Eating Alive program. And that pretty much cured me from chronic fatigue. 5 years of chronic fatigue. After following his thing for 4 months, I felt 85% better. So there's something to the whole oxidative stress thing, which his program helps, and I'm sure eating raw vegan and whole plant foods helps with it too. And I happened to look through the Self-Decode website. I still have my 1-year subscription, but I'm canceling it after this year. Maybe I would go on it again one day. It just has a ton of information. And I am starting to read a bit of a book called Dirty Jeans. I have some books that I've bought recently on Kindle, but I haven't gotten to reading them yet. One is Dirty Jeans, one is Mind to Matter. I started reading that today. It's really interesting. And another one is The Spell of the Sensuous. But anyway, I was looking quickly on the gene page for Self-Decode for somebody else for one of their conditions, and then I looked through my SNPs, again, single nucleotide polymorphisms, and I was just scrolling through and I came across COMT, C-O-M-T, and this is one of the dirty genes that is mentioned as being important in the Dirty Genes book. They talk about MTHFR, which I don't have a SNP in, which many people with bipolar do, but I don't. And that was the main reason I did the genetic testing and different things to find out, and I don't have that one. And it talks about, I think, COX1 and 2, the gene DAO, COMT. Anyway, there are a few main ones that the book Dirty Genes talks about. And so I quickly looked for all those genes to see if I have a SNP in them, because the book would say, oh, you don't even need to do the genetic testing, just do the Dirty Genes cleaning protocol and it'll clean up these main genes. But I looked and I only have a SNP in COMT of the main ones in the book Dirty Genes. And I was reading through some of what it says on the Self-Decode website, and it's pretty interesting. It talks about and a lot of the genes say a lot of different things that could conflict, but I'm looking at this one because it is talked about as a main gene in the book, Dirty Genes. And so it talks about more pleasure out of life. So AA, which is what I have as a SNP, reported feeling twice as positive emotion towards a pleasant event than GGs. GG is subjectively viewed a very pleasurable event on the same level that AA would view a slightly pleasurable event. So this could explain a little bit. I'm just pointing out that it could relate to why I get so excited just seeing a little frog outside my door. And maybe I saved the frog by poking at him because he went around the corner on the siding, and then there was this huge hailstorm, which if he was still sitting on the outside of the door and it started, it could have killed him. So I was thinking it was bad of me to poke him, but maybe I saved his life. And then it says AA. Oh, there's a lightning. This is more creative, divergent thinking fluency. That was weird. The thunder went and my arm did this like twitchy thing that didn't even, felt weird. So the effect was quite large for the more pleasure out of life thing. Better reading comprehension, blah, blah, blah. And it says better cognitive functioning when not under stress. Better attention and processing of information. So that's interesting that here they call executive function attention and processing of information. I need to write that down. And more exploratory, better response to placebos, higher cognitive stability but comparatively low cognitive flexibility. Increased verbal fluency for males but decreased for females. Better fine motor skills, better ability to aim. I have pretty good aim. Better absorption of tea polyphenols. Ooh. Lower risk for alcoholism. Yeah, I'm done with that. Worse handling of stress or pain. So it says researchers found when viewing unpleasant pictures, the startle response for women with AA was 6 times stronger compared to those with only 1A. So that could explain my real intolerance to like scary, awful stuff and not wanting to watch the news. Lower emotional resilience, more negative emotions, less able to handle negative events well, more impulsive, more depression, less cooperative, helpful, and empathic. Ooh, I try. Less extroverted, more neurotic, higher homocysteine. That's something I used to pay attention to. I did get a homocysteine level test once, and it was quite high. I think it's B12 that brings down homocysteine levels, but I kind of want to look into that. I can't remember what it does. I used to know, but it's an interesting one to look at. And higher sensitivity to mercury. Now this one's interesting. It says higher sensitivity to mercury. And I think years ago when I did Dr. Matson's program, a lot of it was about chelating mercury out of the body. And I had a lot of mercury in my body. I had a chelation test, yet I never ate fish. And I did a lot of research years ago to find out where that could have come from. Could have come from a paper mill that I worked at. Could have come from all the Dove soap that I was using that has mercury in it. And it could have come from vaccines, of course. So I think, yeah. So that's just a little bit. There's so much information on the Self-Decode site. But since I was on there looking for someone else, information for someone else, I thought to just glance through the genes. And since COMT is really important in the Dirty Genes book, then I'll probably read through the COMT section to see what it says. And yeah, so that's interesting. And today, I think I already said I put the CBD cream on my face and neck, and I'm finding that I don't know if it's that, but I did it the other day too, and I found myself more able to read on the computer. So I'm doing this experiment of utilizing it during the day and seeing what happens, and I think I notice an effect. And somebody's coming to test drive my car in an hour and 15 minutes, so hopefully this thunder and lightning stops. So I'm going to try this tonic water. I don't really know if I'll notice a difference. My stomach has been bothering me a bit still lately. I'm going to eat some goji berries later. Gotta open this. I wanted to try this one because I think it's sparkling, and I don't know if those ones in the bottles are. Oh, it's kind of weird.
It's a double rainbow. Don't know if I've ever seen one before. Look at that. I knew there'd be a rainbow. Never seen a rainbow like that before. Oh man, it's the whole thing. Look at that. It's so awesome.
That is the most cool rainbow I've ever seen in my entire life. It used to be full on across. You can still kind of see it. And it was a double rainbow too. Well, it is a double rainbow. And it's got just so much right there. That right here. So many bands. So cool. What a magical day. Picking up some kind of like white lines coming down from the rainbow in my eyes. I don't know if you can see that too. Oh, I sold my baby car. I miss her already. So sad. It's okay. I do have a better car now, but I like the old car smell. And it's really fun to drive, so I'm glad I took it for one last nostalgic test drive. So it worked out. I'm going to see the Enlightened Master I studied with 10 years ago. And I'm not seeking anything. I just want to look into his eyes. And I do feel that the light coming out of one's eyes is the most powerful nutrient and force in the universe. So, just a glance. That's it. So I've just parked and I'm feeling the energy, and now I'm gonna go find the venue and be there. I'm feeling a little bit like emotional or something. I don't know what it is, but it's magical. So the event is over. There was no recording allowed of any kind, no pictures, so I didn't do that. But I did make a couple of notes. And yeah, I feel like I'm not seeking. I feel like a lot of what he said, I've said to myself. One interesting thing he said is that you have to give it to another. So I'll talk about my notes later, but I'm going to drive home and go to sleep. And I might try to see him in person at some point. Last night I was texting with my brain twin, and it seems that he's gotten through a crisis without the hospital, so he's finally feeling back to normal. And those were his words. And then he also said that he finally feels alive for the first time in 10 years. And that's just so huge. And I can't help but wonder if some of that might not be, or might be attributed to the fact that we've been talking almost every week for like going on 3 years for the most part. And he really talked me through my last hospitalization. It was really scary and awful, and it was in April 2016, and he called me every day, even though he lives 2,000 miles away. And that was so helpful. And we've been talking weekly, and our conversations vary from very co-creative to one of us being completely lost and down and out and everything in between. And yeah, so I'm excited to get to see him when I go to California, and I'm just really happy to hear him say those words of how he feels alive again and how he got himself through this crisis without going to the hospital, which I think that's usually what would happen for him. So yeah, that's amazing. And I went to see that Enlightened Master talk 2 nights ago, and it was really great, and had to do some schedule shuffling to be able to make it, and I wasn't sure if I would be able to, but it did work out, and I'm able to go and do a drop-in visit with other people who studied with him when he was here 10 years ago too, and that's on the 27th, and I have to work, and I don't know, I will have to go late, so at least if it's a drop-in, I'll be able to go and say hi and thank you and whatever in person, and just see what happens. I'm curious. And my brain's been having quite a few insights lately, but I haven't really been doing a process of talking about them or writing them down. Just a while ago today, I was thinking about how when the brain gets energized and goes into insight, it can see a lot, or it goes into a certain space, and then when it falls out of it, when the energy decreases, it's almost, as the energy is decreasing, it could be a mechanism that the brain is going into the process of retrospecting and making sense of it, or making logic out of it according to the system structured in the brain, the English language, past memories, what have you, of the personal journey. And I was thinking about that in terms of how somebody wanted me to take them with me to California, and at first I was like, oh, that's a great idea, it could be fun and magical, but then I realized, wow, I need to sleep, I need to take all the energy I have and reserve it just from getting point A to point B, and not getting distracted and trying to go into magic on the way there. I just want to get there to my destination, and that's my only goal. So as I fell out of that energy of possibility space of, yeah, I'll do some stops along the way, blah blah blah, I realized, oh my gosh, sometimes I need to sleep 12 hours, I might need a hotel, I can't camp on the way there, I need to really focus on getting myself there. And sometimes I need to sleep a lot, and then, take all my vitamins and my supplements, and I want to do that in private. I want to drive how I want, listen to what I want. Like, I'm really doing this for me, for myself. I've been planning this slowly for months. So the energy of possibility of like, yeah, let's go on this little journey, make it into a journey and fun, when my brain sort of came out of that energy of relationship and we space, it was kind of like, no, wait a minute, I need this and I need that, and I need to not forget my goals that I've been planning for myself for months, and this person had this idea for a couple of hours or something, and not getting distracted by the magic, knowing when it's important to stay objective and stay logical. And that's something that I learned a distinction between more clearly when I took Steve Pavlina's Abundance Integration deep dive recently, because he talks about objectivity and subjectivity as lenses we can try on and models we can try. And I realized that subjectivity is what gets installed into us in so-called mania, this subjectivity, this dreamlike state of possibilities happening very synchronistically and meaningfully and quickly, this magic, and also objectivity, like logic, getting from point A to B, setting a goal, and there's a space for both. So I think in my mind, in the past, I might have thought, oh, it's important to go in the magic and live in the magic forever and just be magical. Not as a goal, but thinking, well, that is possible for that to happen. Somebody could live in magic all the time. But also realizing people who go into that subjectivity and mania, if we could turn it off and go into objectivity when we realized that it's more coherent in that certain moment, then we could save ourselves possibly a lot of trouble. Maybe we can learn to do that. Just as somebody who hasn't gone into that energetic consciousness or subjective consciousness or dreamlike consciousness or radical awakening, people could think about things subjectively or look at life objectively by their volitional choice of like trying to lean into that type of lens. Well, I feel in so-called mania that lens lends itself to us without us wanting it. We don't have a choice. You know, on a certain level, there is no choice. There is no free will. But when the illusion of the free will comes back, we can free will the objective lens. So I had sort of a choice there. I could have gone on a magical journey where I would have been in possibility with somebody and like, hey, let's stop here, let's stop there, let's do this. Wow, look at this and that. And I don't know if that was, I don't think it was right or wrong, but I just felt like my brain had to change its course and work out too many moving pieces. And I thought of my trip to the island, how I just finally felt ready to go, and then I went, even though I missed my ferry. And I reserved another ferry, which I didn't even have to reserve because it was empty. But the point was, it didn't matter what the cost was. I needed to get on the ferry, and I could only do it when I did it. Even though I reserved for 2, I didn't make it on till 5. And I left that moment I need to leave, and I need that same type of freedom on my trip now. So, interesting challenge, and I did reach out and say, no, that's not going to work for me. And being okay with that feeling of selfishness a little bit, or seeing that, yeah, it would be possible for that to work out too, but I'm going to go with the original plan. And I think it's safer for me to do that too, because where I'm going is magical for me. And I don't need it to be magical all the way there. I just need to get there and then be magical there. And it's so magical that if I were in a state of magical consciousness, I wouldn't even know it, because it's just a magical environment too. So it matches that vibration. So yeah, logic and being calm and steady on the road. I've never driven that far, so I really need to take care of myself properly and get there, and stay in a hotel if I need to, even if it costs $150 or more, to get enough sleep, to sleep off the sleeping pills and drive the next day. You know, that's what it will take, and I'm prepared to pay for that. So that's that. And the Enlightened Master thing, and things feel like they'll be pretty smooth sailing until then. I did look at the Spire summary from last week, and it shows a lot of tense breathing. I really do have a lot more tense breathing than the average. So I mention this because I will be really interested to see what the spire says when I'm in California, because I didn't have it when I went there last time. And that will provide some kind of objective physiological something. It will give me some form of information about my breathing patterns in a more energetically safe space. Beautiful space, lots of nature, quiet, peace, no meat around, no noise, no TV, just sort of a more congruent environment for me, and see what that shows. I made a few notes from the talk the other night, and one thing I made note of was that this enlightened master had his experience at 29. And when I had my crisis that was going on for 2 months before I was hospitalized, it started just before my 29th birthday, and I was hospitalized when I was 29. So that struck me as something interesting. And I think that that's also when Krishnamurti had his enlightenment experience, when he was 29. And I talked in earlier videos about 29 being a Saturn cycle around the sun. So there's something to that. So just like interesting, subjective reality commentaries, which would be how this is meaningful to me and my path. And that meaning is created by me. And someone else could say, well, that doesn't mean anything, but it means something to me. And he tried to go into why he left 10 years ago and didn't come back for 10 years. He didn't quite exactly describe what that was about, but he said something about when he came here, he became more fully himself, and that the people here that were a part of that are his family, because we're connected, because we were connected through that experience and time. And it seemed to me what he was saying, but I don't know for sure, that that's when he was like maybe taking on people as students, or for the first time, maybe. Not maybe for the first time, but looking for disciples, or whatever languaging you want to use. And so by people acknowledging him as enlightened, then he was able to fulfill that role. If nobody would have acknowledged him as that or believed him to be that, he could have easily been a homeless man on the street, lost. So I actually kept seeing the city I used to live in, which I'm sitting in now. I always would see this homeless guy, and he looks exactly like this enlightened master. I don't even know if he was homeless, but he was kind of wandering around, and they look the same. And I almost feel like that could be him, and then his energy comes and is that, or anyway, it's really complicated. I can't explain it, but it's like having another avatar, and perhaps going into emptiness in Malaysia and then waking up in like this other homeless body that looks the same here, and then wandering and finding disciples, versus actually flying across the world. It could be totally different. We really don't know. And people could have easily interpreted him as somebody with a mental illness, possibly. He did say one time in one of his talks online, I wish I would have saved which one it was, he said, I know this feels kind of schizophrenic, but it will have to do for now. And I think he was talking about how this process is so crazy, and it's confusing, and it's something. And even when I was talking about that thing he said at the end of his online talk, I don't think I said the first part of it, but I might have. He said something like, I don't know if this is my madness or my geniusness, and if I read a line or just give me one song, I see so much in it. I see 1,000 times information or something like that. And that's exactly what happens to me, and why it's challenging to read other people's material sometimes, because it gets expanded so much. And one of the things he was emphasizing was that we just want to be ourselves. And I was writing something about this the other day. I was thinking about how Sean Blackwell says that bipolar disorder is I can't be me disorder. And I thought of it a different way. I thought of it as bipolar disorder, or whatever this awakening crisis is the realization of I haven't been me all this time. So it's not necessarily that we can't be ourselves, but in that space of limbo almost that we exist in sometimes, in that bipolar biorhythm, it seems to be this big space of possibility of all these journeys and paths that we could take to get back to our original light body trajectory and find who we were originally meant to be, to find our originality, to find our artistry of ourself. And I remember hearing Emma Bragdon say of the spiritists that this kind of crisis is suppressed mediumship. So to be a medium. And I was thinking of it in terms of suppressed artisthood. A lot of people that I meet in the mental health system, they do some kind of art, like painting or writing or drawing or all sorts of creative things. And it could even be that sometimes I like to think about certain actions that happen as representations of something else. For example, it could be that a lot of us think, well, I paint, or we start painting after a crisis because all along we haven't been the artist, the creator, the author of ourself. So in that space where sometimes we it becomes harder to function in society as it's been designed, that we were integrated and a part of before the crisis, we then, well, if we're not these functional cogs in a machine, well, then we're artists and we paint. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just wondering that maybe the artistry is to create oneself as the work of art, like one's body, one's gestures, one's entire being. And then when we disengage from society through maybe trauma and see, well, I can't function in that because it's going to lead to more trauma. All I see is trauma within that whole system. It's traumatizing to be systematized and economized into agents of the economy versus these artists of ourselves. So that could translate into writing music or singing or playing an instrument or painting. But I think there's even more to the artistry of ourselves. Like, one could think, well, I'm a painter now and paint for the whole life, and that's great. But one could realize that one is an artist and one can create almost anything, including creating one's way to creating oneself as one was originally created. We have to create our way back to that in a way. So each moment where we're being creative and in that creative space, we're becoming artists of our true human self that we were born to be here, that we got so far away from because we were educated and mechanized. So that space, in a way, is that I've never thought of it like that before, but it's like this open limbo potential space of trying to get back to our original and originality, our original self, how we came here to be. So yeah, there's a lot to that. And being an artist and painting could be a part of that too, of course, but there's so much more. And he did talk about similar things that I've talked about with myself, like how the economy banks on us not being ourselves, because when we're not ourselves, we buy things to try to fulfill ourselves. And he's saying that we think the mind is the problem solver and the mind is the problem. I've talked about myself with that. I do feel like he gave more elementary talk because it was like a general audience. And the person who introduced him said that this is, like, he bases his talks on his audience or the level of learning of his students. So, he tried to make the point that you are perfect just as you are now, in a way. Meaning that there's nothing to seek. It's more of a realization. So, I feel like I totally understood everything that he said. I don't know if other people did, and that doesn't matter, but the reason I went to the talk to see what the quality of my listening would be. Was it seeking some kind of answer from this person? And I wasn't. I feel like, I feel more similar to him than different. And it was interesting, he mentioned that his dad died 7 days after his dad's own enlightenment. Like, he became enlightened 7 days before he died, and it didn't matter. And that was interesting for whatever reason. And he talks about celebrating me without shame or guilt. And the part that I did get something new out of in a way was, he says, give others the power to be them. And what he said was, what did he say exactly? Oh, he says, one of the things you have to do is to offer this to another. So offer this realization that one is already how one is meant to be. Like, there's nothing to seek to add to oneself. And I might say that once one realizes that, things start getting subtracted from oneself. So it could be that there was never anything to add, but since we added all these things as layers on top of us, then it takes a little while to shake all of that off, or for it to naturally fall away, like whatever. So, and he talked about then there's synchronicity and perfection. And I noticed he sits on his hands sometimes, kind of like Krishnamurti, and he was wiggling his feet in kind of an interesting way. And I watched at first, he seemed almost like he couldn't open his eyes, and he was like sleeping, and it took a while for the energy to sort of wake him up. And it almost seemed to me like his body was de-energized by being in like a lower energy field, and then once he was able to talk his way into being really awake, his energy was sort of above that field that would make him kind of in that energy of sleepy thought that I've talked about a lot with myself. And he talked about realizing that he never dies, his body dies. I've totally seen that, man. It's weird. And I think I've walked through the portal of death, and it's kind of scary to survive that, but it's okay. And he said you don't have to do anything. And that's something I really learned this summer by not doing much of anything. You don't have to do anything. And even this now, talking to myself, isn't doing anything. So in terms of offering this to another, as one loves, one must recognize that the other loves too. He said he has no thoughts and no dreams most often. I do have a bit more dreams right now taking those sleeping pills, but otherwise I don't really have thoughts. And the group I was facilitating the other day, I noticed that everyone looked really shiny and beautiful, and a lot more energetic than day one. Yeah, so he said, whatever you need to actualize, this organism will come to pass naturally without effort. So, and and about the 10 years ago, he found a family here. I found me in them. So that was interesting. And I feel like the counselor I've been seeing, we talked a bit about like past trauma and stuff, but lately we've been talking more on a different level, and she was willing to listen to my crazy story as I wanted to say it, and I felt that it was true. And then I was able to say that to other people, and they listened. So instead of talking to psychiatrists, I was talking to a counselor and like regular people in my life, and speaking this way and not having any sort of resistance towards it. So I guess I was no longer resisting it. But, you know, I'm finding myself by interacting with others and those others are a part of me. And he talked to you about saying he can't help us and show people they don't need help. And that's one of my things, is I think that we've been made helpless. And I've tried to reach out for help in the last few months, like trying to see a shaman, and that didn't work out. So the times that I've reached out for help in the last while, it's been taken away, or it just hasn't worked out. So it's not meant to be, like the shaman or something else. I can't remember. Oh, and having my file closed at mental health. It's sort of like the universe saying, you don't need this kind of help anymore. You're fine. So I don't see the mental health system as a problem as much as like a temporary measure that's there until one no longer needs it. It's like a crutch. And even the mental health system is slowly trying to redesign itself to be a temporary measure, like the more community and acute services. Then, of course, they want you to stay on your meds forever. And that could be a temporary measure, too. One day, I think it'll be different. We won't think that we have to stay on these things forever. So, and for me, it's just about helping me sleep. And that's something my brain twin, I feel, learned, too. Sleep is the magical medicine that keeps us here, physically embodied. Otherwise, without enough sleep, one would eventually implode and kill oneself. So, destroy the body. It's just impossible to stay here in physicality without sleep. And one would still exist in some other possibility space. But, I don't know. I feel like I need to stay here as long as I possibly can, and not end my own existence right now, at least. So, and I'm thinking, and I do think I was meant to go on the journey through the mental health system and see for myself that it's a temporary measure. It's not something that is out to get us, I don't think, or harm us per se. Well, it could be, but it's so hard to explain. It's so complex. And it's basically the difference between the energy field of thought and the energy field of love. And thought wants to assimilate anything that could be an agent of love into thought itself, which is fear and separation and programming and conditioning and reflex patterned actions and yada yada. So there is a way to work towards thought not being able to get the body which requires that the body no longer has reflexive programmed thoughts that would act in fear. So, blah, blah. It's hard to understand. If one wants to really understand that, I suggest studying the teachings of J Krishnamurti. He talks a lot about fear, and it took me, I've been reading his stuff for like 15 years or maybe 10, and it's taken me a long time to understand why he emphasizes so much that we must be free of fear. Because when this energy comes in, well, this is me adding stuff, but if the energy comes in, it will energize fear structures, and then we act even more afraid, and we feel even more afraid, and then we end up in the psych system. But as we can decondition the fear, then the energy comes in and something different happens, whatever that is, and we become agents of that field of love. And at the end of his talk, he said, the question is how you are missing this, not how to find this. So there's nothing to find. It's realizing that we're missing this fact that we're already who we are. And I've been seeing that clearly. And then he said he realized he's always been this. And I've had that sense too. Sometimes when that energy is there, I'm like, wow, it's always been this way. I just never noticed. It's always been this way. I never noticed. And yeah, it's kind of going in between seeing and being perceptive and forgetting and being blind. And at the end he said, you have my blessing, to everyone. So those are just some general points. I didn't do any recording of any kind because it was asked for us not to. Did make some notes myself. And the main take home I took was the thing about offering it to another. And I feel like I possibly naturally offer it to others who I hang out with, because I don't think that they're thinking. I talk from, I think the main key is, where do the words come from? So they come from the bank of thought, which is fear, separation, etc., or do they come from the moment now, the present moment now of emptiness and unknown? And I wrote down again today, and I haven't thought of it this way in a long time, but it's lightning sight and thunder speech, or I think I would call it thunder sound, but there's a perception and a flash, and then, one sees it all in a flash of light, and then it takes a while before, like a lightning strike, it takes a bit before you hear the thunder. That the words just come and the thunder rumbles. So, yeah, where the space, where the words come from is emptiness. And yeah, I have made notes and stuff lately, which I'll try to go into talking about some of them at some point, but I cleaned off my desk a little bit, and I'm feeling much better about that. And I'm going to drink my second tonic water today. Still have 2 others in the fridge, different flavors, different brand. And this one is cucumber mint tonic. And again, it has that ingredient, which is quinine sulfate, which I'm kind of interested in. This one's kind of nice. A bit less of a reaction probably because I tried the other one the other day. And something really interesting happened yesterday. I went to the coffee shop to visit my friend that owns it, and we were chatting a little bit after he closed up, and he was talking about something about how people should be able to afford to live in the city that they work in. And that's really a problem where I live. The housing prices are astronomical right now. And so then I told him about that insight I had that I shared with myself on video some other day recently, which was how one day I don't think property will be worth anything. People at some point will detach from feeling like they need to own a piece of land. People will probably travel light with some clothes, or maybe there's even clothes when they travel and they could just use whatever. And there's more like dorms to sleep inside out of the weather, or even sleeping outside. And people will be more wanderers. And this could take some time, but I see having a home of one's own and owning land kind of like a decorated prison, and then one has to pay for all that, and then one has to work to pay for all that, and it's just kind of a gong show. And that's something that I'm going to be experimenting with these next few months. Well, probably the next year, is living a little bit more like a wanderer, possibly. And I don't know what that'll look like. I'm thinking it might look like going to California, and then when I come back to my home on native land, I will perhaps wander around a little bit and not live in one spot, live with different people, live in different communities possibly, and then perhaps next winter I will try to travel internationally again, maybe somewhere warm, and maybe the year after that I'll go like to European countries or something. I don't know. What I need to do is reduce the amount of vitamins I'm taking, so I'm not carrying a big thing of vitamins. And so going through my next crisis and seeing how I can minimize that when in a good environment, because it'll probably happen December, January, but I'm not afraid of it. But I totally got off topic here. What I was trying to say was, I was just saying to this person, I think one day, could be in 20 years, could be in 100 or 200 years, I don't know, that land value will be nearly worthless. And because we'll all share the land, we won't say, I own this one little piece. So anyway, he made some comments about that. It wasn't, I don't know, we just had a little discussion about that. And then I brought out my book, and I was just saying, oh, like I filled this notebook and a couple others like that in the last couple of months. And he said, can I see it? And I was like, and he just was saying, I just want to open it to a page. He said, that's usually what I do, is just open a book to a page and see what it is. So he was laying down like this, and he just went like this. And then he said, okay, read the page. And I marked the page now with the little string in the book. The string wasn't in the book there, it was at the end. But I put the string, and the page, the very page that he opened up to, perhaps 5 minutes after me mentioning that insight I had about how land won't be worth anything in terms of personal ownership, the page that he opened to was ta-da. So the page that he opened to said, I realized one day personal property will have no value. You won't live in one personal prison. Property value will drop with technology. We must learn to wander with love, immune to thought. So I just started laughing out loud because it was so funny to me that that happened. And when I was in California last year, it would happen that way, that I had something come to mind regarding what I was studying. I'd pick a book off the shelf and open it, and it would say that exact thing. So things start happening in reverse. They arise in mind, and then it's immediately there in manifestation. And the odds of that happening are so small. So what are the odds that he would open to that very statement that I've only written in that book one time? And that's the one that I just said. So it was funny because it was the same sort of thing, saying something and then opening a book, but somebody else opened the book for me, and it still happened that way. So it just shows me that that person is sort of like resonant. Obviously, if they can do that same thing that I did in isolation with them being there. And I'll talk about more stuff later.
Another double rainbow.
Wow, what a rainbow. What a double rainbow. How beautiful. And it was there right when I went out the door. And then it disappeared shortly thereafter. And then I was driving, and the cars coming in the other lane, the rainwater coming off the tires produced a rainbow too. So it almost looked like the cars were driving through rainbow power, or a rainbow was propelling the vehicle, or the vehicles were manifesting from a rainbow. And it looks so cool and magical. And anyway, I'm at my destination. Just wanted to share a little bit of the magic. Finally got a coffee. I'm dressed a little too warm for this weather, but it was cold and rainy the last few days. This morning I sorted out all the medications I'll need for my trip, and I also sorted out some baggies of a few days of vitamins, because I don't want to be reaching into the 30 vials of vitamins that I have when I'm on the road trip portion of getting there. So I did that, and that took some time. I had to make some capsules out of glycine powder, and that's all organized. And then I stopped and got another 150 American dollars. Have a bit of that. So the little bits that I do every day will lead me to be prepared when I leave in less than 2 weeks. And I'm just doing a bit of walking before I head to work. Hi, Squirrely. The other thing I forgot to mention was last night, I think I slept 12 or 13 hours, which I haven't done in a while, but I guess I needed it. Maybe not exactly, but I didn't have to wake up this morning, so I just kept sleeping, and when I got up it was 10:47. It's a beautiful day, so I'm out for a walk. my favorite trail in this area, and it's a quiet Tuesday morning, and I woke up feeling rather tired in my eyes. I didn't have the greatest sleep. Felt like I was kind of awake while sleeping part of the night, and my eyes were feeling tired even walking on this trail. And I finally saw someone walking towards me, and they said good morning. So I said good morning, and I've noticed that just that one little good morning made my eyes feel just a little bit better. And it came to mind how oftentimes as human beings we feel like we need each other or we depend on somebody, but it's a little bit of a different perspective to feel like we are each other. We don't need each other, we are each other. And so then things are based on love thy neighbor as thyself, as opposed to everything that's based on right now. So as I said, I didn't have the greatest sleep. If I don't sleep well tonight, I will stop taking the tyrosine and the methylators and probably not have coffee tomorrow. If I don't sleep well tonight, I'll probably take an extra quarter of Zopicone as well, just to get a really good sleep. So I'm finding that's key, and there's something to wanting to be happy and manic and go into that crazy, wonderful, dreamlike, awake world of magic and synchronicity and the perfection of one's life. And then there's another way of sleeping as much as one can. Oh, there's a fly on my finger. Sleeping as much as one can in order to avoid spending so much time in this consensus world. And by doing that, spending as little time in it as possible, then one can stay in it longer. It's kind of strange.
These two boxes, this one's half full of notebooks, and it has other papers that I've, like some creations down there, and then this one's full of notebooks. And I think those are only from 2015 onward, maybe. I wrote a huge stack of papers when I was first manic, but I recycled them and I scanned them. Could have kept the stack though.
I was just walking in the park, and now I'm walking along the road because up ahead on the trail I saw a bear. And I would have stayed in the park and just walked the trail the other way, but the bear had a cub. So I turned around and there were two other guys there, and we both found an exit onto the road just to be safe. I don't need to fool around with a mama bear and a cub. So I've never walked this way before. I've never walked on the outside of the park. So it'll be a new experience. Time to go the other way. Oh, they have that one has cubs. We better get out of here. It has a baby. So we better get out, I think.
Couldn't go out there.
Yeah, because that's when they're aggressive, when they have babies.
Okay.
I'm probably gonna get out of the park. Just to be safe.
Yeah. So we just crossing the road?
I'm gonna walk this way.
Yeah.
Bye! Last night I slept better. I slept about 12 hours, and I'm wondering if this is partly because last night and 2 nights ago I took a cap of branched chain amino acids. And that's something that I learned from Dr. Peter Smith, to take 20 to 40 grams. And that's something I learned from Dr. Peter Smith of balancingbrainchemistry.co.uk. He said take 20 to 40 grams of branched chain amino acids in the event of a manic emergency. I don't really get manic emergencies, so I figured I'd try it because he said, well, the branched chain amino acids do. They sort of help do the opposite of tyrosine, which is, tyrosine is a precursor for dopamine. And the branched chain amino acids supposedly draw the dopamine out of the brain, or maybe it draws the tyrosine out of the brain, I don't know. And basically it diverts it to building muscle. So I took a cap of it. I don't know how much that is per se. It might only be 1 gram, which is a lot less than 40 grams. I use my empty taurine capsules because I've been putting the 4,000 milligrams of taurine into water. But it might be more than a gram capsule, I don't know, because there could be fillers in the taurine. But I took 1 cap, which is about a gram, and I slept really well. I did have some vivid dreams. I did have the weird thing where I was seeing something and a dream sort of woke me up. It was like I was driving and I saw a red car cut in front of me, and then I hit that car, I think. That guy said hi to me, and he said, I didn't even see you, I was daydreaming. I didn't see him because my phone was in the way. So I'm wondering if that helped me sleep, because that could be a strategy. Maybe I'll be able to take less sleeping stuff if I take a little bit of branched chain amino acids. They taste disgusting, so putting them in a capsule is handy. So I have to remember to bring those because I keep them in the fridge here. So learning more about these strategies and adapting them to myself, because he has the strategy of taking methylfolate or SAM-E in an emergency. And right now I'm taking 200 milligrams of SAM-E daily and a methylfolate daily, and I think it makes me feel better. If I felt really low, I would take more SAM-E, and I have the uridine and inositol and different things. So I started reading a bit of the Dirty Genes book again, because it talks about 5 or 6 major single nucleotide polymorphisms and the effect they can have. Of course, there's probably hundreds or thousands, but they've identified some key ones. And I did have genetic testing years ago when I was trying to sort this out biologically. And I don't have a dirty SNP or of MTHFR, which is common for people with bipolar. But according to this book, it could be acting dirty, even though it's a clean SNP. There's no SNP. There's no single nucleotide polymorphism, not in either a copy of the gene for me, but could still be acting up. There could be still something up with my methylation cycle. Years ago, I did have the homocysteine level checked in my body, and it was high. And by reading this book, I'm understanding it a little bit better. How B9 is needed, which is I think it's methylfolate or folate, but folic acid is the wrong supplementation. So I think by getting rid of the folic acid in my diet, not having as much rice, that's been probably helpful. So I'm seeing the connection by reading this Dirty Genes book, and the only gene that I have that is dirty or has a SNP is COMT, C-O-M-T. And so I can't really figure out if it's going slow or fast with that SNP, but has lots to do with magnesium and craving coffee, which I usually do, but I was able to quit for months last year when I was in California. So yeah, I'm gonna try and look into that stuff more because it's really fascinating, and it's fascinating how much methylation is needed for. It says something like 200 processes, including creating phosphatidylcholine out of choline, and that's needed for creating new cell walls. And if one thinks about neuroplasticity as needing to create new brain cells or cells, then one needs more cell walls for sure. So phosphatidylcholine, something about bile. It's quite interesting actually. Methylating something to make carnitine, which is needed for fat metabolism. So yeah, I'm gonna keep looking into this, researching more, because biology does play a role, probably a bigger role than anything else, because the self isn't really real. I think depending on what biology we have, it will determine how we use words. Do words use us, or are we able to use words? And one of the things that I have access to is new words and new ways of using words. So I think that's really important. So yeah, looking into the biochemistry of it, and I don't know, maybe I will study nutrition one day, because studying the self is kind of silly when you think about it, because there is no self. And the thing is to negate the self, and Krishnamurti teaches that through negation comes the positive. So negating all the aspects of the self, that which is other than the self, which is love, will come into being. We don't even know what love is. Love is the unknown, so we must negate the known. So, and it's not, I think it can be negated and finally negated, and one lives in a field of love. And that's something completely different. One might not even be aware of the self and its aspects. Just living in that world of love. Because the game isn't to negate until one dies. It's to negate until one can create in that field of love. So looking at the biochemistry, because looking at the self is like looking at nothing. Physicality is something, and it could be by changing very few molecules, like orthomolecular, different words and different perception and experience comes into being, and it's pretty simple. I saw a kid at the park earlier, little baby, I don't know how old, probably 4 to 6 months. Couldn't really sit up too much on its own, and he was really big. He was a big baby. He looked like he was wearing boxer shorts that were for an 8 or 10-year-old. Its waist was really big. And I was thinking about how it seems like that switch to create bigger bodies is there in general, and create less brain cells. Anyways, I'm feeling kind of blah because I ate McDonald's fries for the first time since I can remember. I might have not had them more than once in the last 7 years. But it was pouring rain. I didn't have a chance to eat before work, and I was really hungry after work. And I didn't want to get out of the car, and the only drive-through around was McDonald's. So I got fries and a strawberry banana smoothie, but I'm feeling kind of like, ooh. I can feel like anxiety a bit, and maybe because my thought process has been released in terms of, why did I eat that? I'm sure most of us think that after eating McDonald's. And I went through the drive-thru and I said, "What are your vegetarian options?" And she said, "1 sec, let me ask." She didn't even know. And she came back with, "We have French fries and Big Mac without meat and cheeseburger without meat." And I thought at least they'd have some kind of vegetarian wrap or something. But they also said they had salads and you could just not have the chicken. Can't really eat a salad while I'm driving. So yeah, that was that. And yeah, now I'm just feeling kind of fidgety after eating that, since I haven't had it in so long, really noticing how it's making me feel. And so I think had I had some nuts and seeds, I would have been able to manage. But when I don't have enough snacks, this is what happens. And yeah, I'm going to take some oil of oregano once that gets a little bit digested, and hopefully that helps to mitigate some of the awful effects of that. So I don't really know what to talk about, partly because I don't know if I feel like talking that much anymore. I feel like I might get into writing. I don't know. Last night I felt like watching some Downton Abbey, and I haven't done that for a while, so I watched 2 episodes, and I stayed up until a bit after 12, and then slept until 11, so that was nice. And yesterday I was doing a bit of reading in the book Dirty Jeans, and I was reading the chapter on methylation, and it was really interesting because this book is about how certain genes can be dirty genes, in quotes, meaning there could be some kind of genetic single nucleotide polymorphism, which leads them to be sort of sluggish or fast. And the methylation chapter is about the gene MTHFR. And I know I don't have that as a single nucleotide polymorphism, but from what I read, it seems like my gene wasn't necessarily born dirty, but it's acting dirty. Meaning that if there's a certain amount of toxic buildup, etc., then it can still act sluggish. And I remember years ago I had my homocysteine levels checked, and it was at 12. And this book says it shouldn't be any higher than 7. And I'm not sure what my levels are at now, because they said now, oh, we don't test for that anymore. But from reading this chapter, I learned a little bit about what might have been going on there. So the chapter on MTHFR said that gene, MTHFR, passes a methyl group to folate, which makes methylfolate. Right now I'm supplementing with methylfolate. And methylfolate plus homocysteine, so methylfolate gives a methyl group to homocysteine, which then creates methionine. So it's possible that if I had high homocysteine, that I didn't have enough methylfolate to methylate homocysteine to methionine. That's part of what possibly could have been happening. And it's possible I didn't have enough methylfolate because I didn't have enough folate, or it could have been because the MTHFR gene wasn't working properly. And my naturopath tested me for that SNP, as it's called, and he saw that I didn't have that as a SNP. So he never told me to take methylfolate, though I am taking it now, which I learned from Dr. Peter Smith and also Dr. Mercola. I've just heard it from a few sources recently that folic acid isn't good. It's kind of artificial folate, and it blocks this whole process. And I was taking folic acid at some point, and I probably was taking B12 with folic acid at some point. So I could have been taking a B12 that had folic acid that was messing with this whole first step of methylfolate methylating homocysteine to methionine. So I would be interested to find out at some point if I have high homocysteine by going to a naturopath or something. So I'm taking the methylfolate now, which could be making up for the MTHFR gene not working properly. But that it's a cycle, so that's not the only place where it could have been messed up. So then there's more of a pathway after homocysteine to methionine, a pathway of genes and enzymes and things like that. And then it said, finally, the methyl group forms S-adenosylmethionine, which is actually SAMe. So that's the end product of that cycle. And I'm taking SAMe now. So right now I'm taking the beginning product, methylfolate, which methylates homocysteine to eventually create SAMe. And I'm taking some SAMe. So maybe I'm overdoing it taking both, but I feel better taking a little bit of SAMe and taking some methylfolate. And this book warns against taking SAMe prematurely, and it can be not so great for bipolar from what I've read. But my naturopath did tell me, the one I saw years ago, he did tell me to take a little bit of SAMe. But I'm thinking this methylfolate is helping because I needed to push the homocysteine on as well. So it's SAMe, which ultimately passes methyl groups onto the 200 functions or processes that need them. So I didn't realize before reading this the other day how important SAMe is. And generally our body makes that. So after SAMe has passed on its methyl groups, it becomes homocysteine again. So this is where I also feel I could have formed too much homocysteine, is that whatever SAMe I was forming, I was passing on those methyl groups to other processes and forming homocysteine. So it's like a double whammy or a double SAMe in a way that I think my body needs a lot of methylation because of all the stuff I've talked about with myself about this neurofluidity. It says there's 200 functions or processes that need the methyl groups from SAMe. In a brain that's really neurofluid, more so than neuroplastic, one could need even more methyl groups because that's something that is really an epigenetic switch. There could be even more in a brain that is mutating in a way. So homocysteine is an end product of methylation and the beginning. So I feel that it's possible that maybe MTHFR isn't a dirty gene snip in me. It could just be that I need even more methyl groups. So maybe MTHFR is making methylfolate, but it's so quickly going to homocysteine and going through that whole cycle to form SAMe that it's so quickly back at homocysteine, and that was piling up, and I was at 12. And this book, which is a more recent book, says a person should be at no more than 7. So I do want to check that again because that would give some indication. And of course there are other factors, so that isn't the only thing. And this book advocates for eating a lot of leafy greens and nuts and seeds and nutritional things that would up these processes. I've been using the supplement thing because I haven't had a kitchen to fully support myself to make super healthy food. So I have been doing the supplement thing. I just ate McDonald's fries today and I'm feeling it. So even though I was able to eat Subway, Mucho Burrito, and lots of different things, I think my body's drawing the line at McDonald's. It's saying, don't do that again. Don't eat those fries again. And I'd like to be able to negate and be immune to all these bad things in reality. And one day I'll be able to, but right now I think my body's like, no, McDonald's, you can't. You can't not believe that that's good for you, or you can't not believe that that's bad for you. It's just gross and bad. And there's no way to dispute that, even with the power of consciousness, at least not at this moment. And then other things that I talked about in terms of methylation is that folate, which is B9, is methylfolate when methylated. And one also needs methylcobalamin, which is B12. So all these things are methyl, like homocysteine goes to methionine with the methyl group. And so if B9 or B12 are deficient, then that gets screwed up too. And like I mentioned, I was taking B12 with folic acid for a while, so that could have messed up the methylfolate, the B9. And, you know, they fortify food with folic acid, and I think it's kind of done on purpose to mess up our methylation cycle so our brain can't grow and heal and methylate all the processes and genes and enzymes that it needs to in order to work properly. So, and another thing that it needs is riboflavin, which is B2. And choline, interestingly enough, which I can't remember where that fits exactly, but it's important. Well, I think it was because choline forms phosphatidylcholine when it's methylated, and that's needed for cell membranes. So in order to grow new brain cells, we need cell membranes. And so methylation is really important for that. So learning how important methylation is, and that's just one little aspect of the book. And I did talk before about how I do have a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism in COMT, C-O-M-T gene. So there are so many different levels to explore this stuff on, and I think these genetic switches are really important by being healthy and stuff like that. And I haven't yet been super healthy while I've been talking to myself for the last 2 years. For the first year I was eating a lot of rice, which is fortified in folic acid, which would mess up methylation. So it's important to keep learning and growing and not give up. And yeah, I've made a lot of other notes too, but you know, some of them are around language, and let me look. Something else that has inspired me to maybe focus more on writing is that I listened to a webinar with Stephen Kotler, who's someone I mildly follow in that he talks about flow states. And I read his book and Jamie Wheel's book, Stealing Fire. So I wanted to listen to his webinar on writing because I don't really know much about writing as a craft, and he talks about it in that way. So he talked about elements of writing that I've never thought about that way before, but it's interesting because he talks about rhetoric, and I don't know that much about rhetoric in terms of theory or as a study. And he's talking about certain factors of rhetoric, like alliteration, which is using like a similar sound, like L's a lot, and things like that. And he talks about one called hyperbation, scrambling word order. And when we do that, when the brain unscrambles it, then somebody gets a shot of dopamine. And hyperbole, which is apparently exaggeration. So I feel like people who get really connected with writing and bipolar and write in metaphor and use alliteration and poetry and so many different things, like all these elements that he's talking about in this webinar, I related to in terms of how that's how I naturally would write when in an energetic state. But the point he made was that if you use it too much, you'll drive your readers crazy. And I thought of this even in terms of how when we use it too much when we're writing to ourselves or writing something from that creative space, it drives us crazy to write that way, to use words in that way all the time, to be in this state of speaking in terms of metaphor and poetry and simile and alliteration and pointing out patterns between things that other people can't necessarily see. So we're in that state in terms of how words flow through us or how we use words. And then that also leads us to be in this higher energetic state. And it could be the trouble of using words like that all the time that drives us crazy. So for example, and this is something he talks about later. So I'm only talking about this not to share what Stephen Kotler says about writing, but I'm sharing it to extrapolate it to what happens to people in so-called bipolar, where sometimes we can't stop writing. And it could be that we can't stop writing and that we're writing with these rhetorical type ways of writing without even knowing it. So he talks about the flowers of rhetoric, which is persuasion. I don't really like the word persuasion. I think that a lot of the rhetoric, and I'm going to call it in a way bipolar rhetoric, we're seeing something, we're seeing patterns. So he talks about how dopamine detects patterns and gets a squirt when they're violated. So in so-called mania, we do detect a lot of patterns. And we also, when we detect new patterns, a lot of times those patterns contraindicate or negate or write over old patterns that we used to take for granted. So that's a way that we could be getting a really big dopamine boost through having these different language structures operating in our brains and writing in that way and speaking in that way, to the point where we're speaking so fast that other people can't understand us. So it could be also safer to write it as opposed to say it to other people. So in this way, one can figure out different strategies and use language in a consensus way in day-to-day reality and do writing in this sort of bipolar rhetoric. And I'm calling it bipolar rhetoric because, like I said, all these things that he was sort of pointing out as factors of writing rhetorically, we naturally use. It would be like a type of poetic rhetoric. And it's not for persuasion, but it's to see if other people can see what we're seeing, because we are writing based on what we're seeing, which is using language in a different way. And it gets kind of fun to like make up poetic lines or alliteration or exaggeration or swapping words around or spelling things in a different way or using them in a different context. But maybe the point isn't that we can do that and letting it get out of hand, but the point could possibly be that since we're writing in this really rhetorical way, that we're trying to show something to somebody or to ourselves. We're trying to say to ourselves what we're seeing. But it could also be an indication that maybe we are supposed to communicate something to other people if we have access to this type of rhetoric. So learning how to master that could be interesting. And I was struck by this article in Common Ground magazine called Hard to be a Saint in the City, The Spiritual Vision of the Beats. So I learned about the Beat Generation when I watched a movie about some guy from the Beat Generation. I can't remember his name now. And then there was this article in the Beat Generation, about the Beat Generation in Common Ground. And it's really interesting how it talks about, the whole article is interesting, and how people don't take this form of writing seriously from the Beat Generation people. It says self-invented bop spontaneous prose, a jazz-inspired meld of improvisation and stream of consciousness. So, yeah, it's a really good article, and I think that we as bipolar people have access to this too. And it could have even been like, did bipolar really even exist back when these beat people were doing their thing, which was, I think, like the 50s and 60s? I don't know for sure. But it's almost like these people got access to this way of writing, like improvisation. And I've talked about die and provolog as a way of communicating and gesturing. And it's almost as if the mainstream was like, well, let's call these people bipolar and label them with a mental illness instead of letting them run wild and almost create a new culture in a way, or have an influence on culture. And it says here, for example, it says these two guys provided the vocabulary and conceptual framework for the very idea of a beat generation. So I don't want to just read over the article because it's by Robert Inshausti, who wrote this article, Hard to be a Saint in the City, which sort of resonates with bipolar people. Sometimes we get connected with this spirituality, but it's impossible to uphold it around all of this like civilization that we have. And I do feel that it's possible that part of our role is to change the culture through the rhetoric that we get access to by seeing a different dimension, seeing through the conditioned structures of society, seeing the meaning behind it all. And so just listening to Stephen Kotler made me realize, wow, we have this sort of bipolar rhetoric, but it goes into overload, and that bipolar rhetoric might be one mode of speaking and communicating, and we still need to maintain our mode of the self and of storytelling and of thought and of all the other different language structures and tenses, present, past, future tense, command tense. We need to still have access to these other tenses. And how is it that we can write in order to like teleport people into our way of seeing through our use of language? And there could be a way to work on that, because as I see it, we already have access to it, but when we don't know what it really is, then it can get out of control. And, partly, well, I don't need to go into that, but, so I made quite a few notes on what he was saying. He talked about a way of writing that when people solve the puzzle, they get a squirt of dopamine. So there could be a way to write in a bit of a less puzzling way, so people can actually solve the puzzle of what we're writing instead of being completely bewildered by it. So sort of toning down what we do and not doing it the whole time in our writing. And also, he just gave some other tips for things, and he said people's attention span on average is 8 to 9 seconds. That's frightening. And I feel like what he shared and how it relates to dopamine is partly a way that we can understand how dopamine gets so boosted in the brain. So one of the ways to prevent that, like for me, it even happens for me if I spend too much writing for a number of days, like it kind of implodes my brain. Even when I was on the island, when I look at my spire breathing and how much time I spent in focused breathing, like 2 hours a day as opposed to like 15 minutes. I was doing too much studying and too much writing, and it didn't really give my brain a chance to get that dopamine out of my brain. So then I just write some blah blah whatever. So let me see what else I got here. So for example, he said that the brain likes 3 bits of information at a time, or 4, because we have limited working memory. And sometimes I feel like in my writing, I could write really, really long paragraphs without a period or something. And maybe that's just too long for a reader that is using working memory in order to read. One might suggest not reading to even try to put it into working memory. So it could also be, for what I'm talking about, is suggesting that people read in a completely different way. Not to remember, but read in a stream of consciousness way. We think of writing in a stream of consciousness way, but we don't necessarily think of reading in a stream of consciousness way by just reading and allowing some other faculty to do the understanding than conditioned thought. And so he says the rule of 3 in speaking and writing: to convince, to believe. Well, I don't think one needs to convince anybody of anyone. It's more like, can you see with your own eyes? And then you don't need any convincing. So to me, the whole mechanism of belief is kind of erroneous. But anyway, he also implies that it's obnoxious to use big words. And sometimes in bipolar, I think we can use big words sometimes, or I do making up of words, of my own words, and sometimes they're big words. So that's even more obnoxious. So reading these little tips is helpful somewhat to know. And I just have some of my own stuff mixed in with that. The other part that I wanted to get to was that anyway, what I was writing to myself about what he was saying was something slightly different, which is often what I do, because when people are writing from a certain perspective of self, I often extrapolate it to something different. So for me, for example, when I read stuff, oftentimes my brain extrapolates to something new automatically, like creates 10 times the information from reading one sentence. So if one could write in such a way that all of a sudden at some point a person's brain was doing that, they now have that capacity activated and they could write their own book from reading just a few lines of someone else's, and it would be completely new and original. So it would be writing in such a way to get the brain to the immediate action of extrapolation, not reading for comprehension. And that's, I guess he was talking about, Stephen Kotler was talking a little bit about that in terms of reading like a writer. So that wouldn't be reading for comprehension, it's reading in a way possibly for, I don't remember what he said, but for me it would probably be something even more beyond, which is extrapolation. Being able to the brain cells immediately act to extrapolate and create more than was there, and it's original and new. It could be almost completely unrelated to that thing. So, another thing that interests me about what he writes is he talks about transient hypofrontality, which is the prefrontal cortex shutting down, and that is one of the initial conditions for flow to happen, is for the prefrontal cortex to shut down. So why would we want the prefrontal cortex, which is like the thing we say is the most amazing evolutionary thing in the world in terms of the human brain, this prefrontal cortex? the best part of it happens when we're in flow, when that shit shuts down. And that's what I've said to myself a lot. And it needs to shut down in order for flow to happen, because the prefrontal cortex is the sense of willpower, logical, complex decision making, long-term planning, sense of morality, which is all like, it's all preconceived. It's all preconceived. It's all old. It's all conditioned. So for something new to happen, everything that we've preconceived of, that has been conditioned into us, needs to shut down temporarily. So I think in bipolar, this hypofrontality happens for a longer period of time. And if it could be possible that if more of us were able to be hypofrontal more often, then it wouldn't have to be out of control in some people. Can we control our hypofrontality in a way? And it could be that the thing I've been thinking about is, a new level of language, or a new tense of language, a new way of using language, which isn't about the self at all. And that could actually be a type of hypofrontal language, and a type of hypofrontal action. Because I think the prefrontal cortex is the seat of the self. And there's so much to that, but language is a big part of that. So all those things are part of the self. And he even said self is all over the prefrontal cortex, and it's a huge network, and we lose the ability to sense the self when we're hypofrontal. And it's so big what they're saying here, yet it's not extrapolated to what happens to people when they lose their sense of self in like a so-called mental health crisis. But I feel like we can learn to act in a hypofrontal way, and we can learn to speak in a hypofrontal way. Then we don't have to worry about this self and how it's innervated all over the prefrontal cortex. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about that he eventually gets to is that it's not that. I don't need to talk about that. But it's something about how like dopamine spikes at about 20 minutes. So after that, that's almost a little too much. Now think about how in bipolar our brain is soaked in dopamine for probably days and weeks and months possibly. And it's saying here that, 20 minutes. So that's why he said, TED Talks are 20 minutes long. But what I was thinking was, this is a good tip for people with bipolar. Don't do any type of bipolar crazy writing for more than 20 minutes. Because after that, for us, dopamine's probably going to get too high. He was saying that dopamine kind of runs out, and then people are like kind of tired and they can't handle any more information. But people with bipolar know that we can go on with dopamine for days and months and weeks and things like that. And it's not necessarily a way to stay grounded in so-called consensus reality. So, do the bipolar rhetoric stuff 20 minutes a day, and maybe it's good to do 20 minutes a day to get the brain used to that amount of dopamine, and then sort of shutting off. So that way, if one did that, a practice of 20 minutes of bipolar writing a day, one would get a sense of, okay, how do I feel when that's enough dopamine, like the 20 minutes of regular dopamine that is sort of the max for so-called normal people. What does that feel like? So then one could maybe learn when to dial back if the dopamine spikes at another time in the day. So like that could be a way to learn that, because one of the ways we do get the most hyped up is through writing. which is part of perceiving. So yeah, again, the webinar was really good, and I don't want to talk about all of it because I just wanted to talk about those few things. And then I started writing a little bit as a result of that. So then I wrote something to Steve Pavlina as a result of reading some of that, or listening to this webinar, and I don't know if I want to read that. It probably won't come across very good because usually when I read stuff, it's kind of like blah, 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 blah. But yeah, I'll see if I want to read that or not.